welcome to the Meta. I am your host, Jay Larson, and joining me, as always, well, not really as always, as once a month happens, is William Hungerford. Hello, Will.
Hey, Jay. How's it going? I would be here always if I could.
I appreciate that, Will. And I'm pretty good. I'm currently, so Brian and I adopted two kittens, and they technically do classify as kittens. They're 8 months old, but they are giants disguising as felines that are bigger than any adult cat that I've had. But they need a good home. They've been sweet, but they are definitely going through the kitten things of like when we started recording, one was trying to chew the star on our Mickey Mouse like Christmas decoration, stuff like that. So it's been an adventure getting used to having kittens around.
You're raising two babies who
Yes.
They're animals, but they're still babies.
Yes, that is correct.
Well, good luck.
Well, thank you. We'll need it. We're Brian and I are outnumbered now for the first time, so
that's okay. You're bigger than they are. You'll be fine.
That's true.
Probably,
that's true.
Maybe.
Yeah. So William, anything new with you?
Today's when we're recording, today's the last day in the office before we're all gone for Christmas break. I'm going back to the Bayou to see family for the first time in 2 years, flying for the first time in 2 years. My last flight was to LVO 2020. So got my booster shot on Monday. I'm as protected as I can be through medicine, and we're just good. Fingers crossed, hope for the best here.
Fair enough. Brian and I were in the weekend before Disneyland shut down. We just happened to be in Disneyland that weekend, and then it shut down for like a year or whatever. But yeah, that was our last trip pre-COVID, was going to Disneyland. And what are the odds that we would just happen to have a trip to Disneyland?
Well, being that you're there every other week, pretty good.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I wish that was the case, but sadly it is not. But yeah. So, normally, when I have you on, we have questions from patrons that you answer, and it's a delightful time. This time, I decided to do something a little bit different, and go over with you basically an overview of Rivenstone, give people an introduction to it. You've talked a lot about the game, and you've also done a good description of the game in the past, but I think a lot of that is behind a paywall, and so I wanted to have a podcast out there for people to listen to that can be a little bit of a foundation for some of our future conversations we'll keep having. So let's dive in. Will, what's the miniatures project that you've been working on?
So yeah. And I definitely appreciate the opportunity because, like you said, we had done a pretty deep dive, but it was only for the select few. So I've been working on a game called Rivenstone. Probably seen me posting about it. Might have heard it by now. Before we get started, if you go to the company I'm with, if you haven't heard, it's called Broken Anvil Miniatures, and they have a website, brokenanvilminis.com. That's MINIS. So brokenanvilminis.com. We just finished a big lore series. We're basically a weekly blog where on every Wednesday, I was writing about the lore of the setting, which I'll briefly describe in this podcast. But if you really want to go deep and read fiction written about the world, see art of some of the characters and soldiers and heroes, and see some of the models, that's all up there. And the reason I'm bringing that up is after the holiday break, when we come back, the next blog series we're going to start weekly is the gameplay blog series, where we're going to every week do a really kind of deep dive into an aspect of gameplay. So while we'll cover a lot of sort of high level view of things in this podcast, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of exact text and see diagrams of stat cards and stuff like that, we'll be able to show all that on the. So for starters, what is Rivenstone? It's a tabletop war game. It's a skirmish war game. So between 9 and 15 models per player. depending on how you construct your warband. You can go more elite and play less models. You can go, I don't say swarmy, but you can go more, I'd say, midline and have more models. Game plays in about an hour to a half, I would say. Your first games, of course, will take you a little bit longer as you have to learn the rules. So I'd say most people's first games, when they read the rules and they're sitting down with everything in front of them, about 2 hours, 2.5. But after that, like once you get it down, hour and a half easy. The scale of the miniatures is 35 millimeter heroic. So while our base sizes in the game are 32 millimeter, 40, 50, and 60, those models on them are pretty beefy. You're gonna get some big beefy boys and girls on your bases. The miniatures themselves are Ceocast resin. It's a new type of resin. It's like thermoresin that is really clean, really easy to work with, and extremely durable. And if people have never messed with it before, some of the new Infinity models that came out recently are Ceocast, and they're great. They're really, really nice. They're paint up fantastic, and they're the kind of resin that like you could drop it off the table and you don't have to worry about the resin itself breaking or chipping. Your connection points that you glued together, you might have a problem there, but that's with really any miniature. But it's a really cool thing, and we can produce a lot of it like quickly and efficiently, and it's also very environmentally friendly because the sprues it comes on, we can recycle those and reuse those. So it's a new kind of material that's really cool. And as anybody who wants to learn more about Ceocast, go on YouTube, do a couple searches, you can find stuff about it there. So let me talk briefly about the world. So there's a little bit of a backdrop, but like I said, go check out that lore blog series. This is a high fantasy setting. Think Final Fantasy, maybe even a little Monster Hunter. So this is a setting we're gonna have people that are like sword and sorcery mixed with like firearms, like a little bit of technology. But in this setting, magic is the driving force of sort of all things, and magic isn't some ethereal energy people don't see. Magic is so potent, it grows out of the ground. These deposits called Rivenstone. It shows up, it sort of warps the area around it and has all kinds of strange arcane effects. The various nations and cultures of this world go out and mine it, and their use of it sort of determines how they progress. Some people use it as fuel. Some people use it as magic reagents for spells. Some people use it for like religious ceremonies. Some people eat it and, use it to evolve themselves. It has all kinds of different uses. It's a basically magic super fuel that comes out in crystal form. Long story short, a bunch of stuff in the world goes wrong with Rivenstone. It transmutes into a storm that crosses over the world for some time, unleashing basically magic energy and infusing the planet with magic before that storm cools back down. And in the point of the setting of the game, you're playing warbands of the nations that sort of weathered the storm, and now that Rivenstone is regrowing back in crystalline form, are going to go get it, but you're going out into a wild and changed world. So your battles can take place in, traditional, let's say, forest with some hills, or a city that got destroyed during the storm, so a ruined city, or really weird stuff like floating islands, glowing forests, a sentient river, whatever you want to come up with your imagination. The world has had this sort of like epic fantasy cataclysm occur, and everyone's kind of venturing back out into the wilds with all the evolved predators and things to go fight over Rivenstone again. So that's the very top level view. Definitely go read the lore blog for the much more detailed explanation. Gameplay wise, we're doing a lot of things in this game that I've seen bits and pieces in other games, and then a lot of aspects that are unique. And I think it creates a really unique tabletop war game experience that there really isn't something that's all of this stuff put together in the way that we've done it. So it's an alternating activation. You have a warband consisting of heroes and followers. Heroes are your big badasses. They come in all shapes and sizes. Followers are your standard soldiers. And then you have a barracks, and there's different barracks for different factions. In this game, because you only have 8 to 11 miniatures, one thing is your barracks lets you respawn destroyed soldiers. Narratively, what's happening is these barracks are things like portals or holes in the ground, or for the dwarves, a giant drill that's coming up and down out of the ground, stuff like that. And the idea is that as soldiers die, more reinforcements are coming out on the battlefield to help keep pushing. So for starters, this isn't a game that you can really win by traditional attrition. This is more of a tempo-based war game where you're fighting over your victory points, and killing opponent models definitely matters because a lot of this game is board positioning, being able to achieve certain things in certain areas of the board. So pushing them off of that is important because they're going to end up respawning back at wherever they deployed their barracks, which is usually near their table edge. And you're trying to just kind of create this constant like incremental advantage of tempo where I'm holding this, you come at me, I throw you off and stuff like that. But you can never be tabled. You can never lose by just somebody kills all your models and the game is over. You're always in the game until the game is done. When you set up a game, you pick a scenario, and there's a variety of narrative scenarios. Most of them are symmetrical, but we also have asymmetrical core scenarios if you want something a little bit more difficult. And we even say in the rule book, the symmetrical scenarios are more for like just straight balanced gameplay. Asymmetrical ones are imbalanced towards one side. They are more challenging for one player than the other. Maybe the defender has a harder time. And these are more for people who just want a special challenge or to, play out a certain cool story. But for traditional head-to-head play, you play one of the symmetrical scenarios. So you pick one of those. You pick an event deck, which is basically a global effect that is in play for both players. This is things like maybe another arcane storm is passing overhead. Maybe the area you're fighting in is magically cursed with eternal darkness. Maybe there's an evolved monster running around attacking both players. Any event deck works with any scenario. And then once you know those two, you construct your warband. The size of the game is either 2 hero games or 3 hero games. If you do a 2 hero game, you get to pick 2 heroes, and you get to pick 3 groups of followers. Groups of followers are usually 2 to 3 models per group. So you can see if you're doing a 2 hero game, say you pick 3 follower groups that are 3 models each. That's 9 followers, 2 heroes, that's 11 models, and then you get a barracks model. So your warband would be 12 models. A 3 hero game is 3 heroes and 4 follower groups. There are various factions, and we can talk about them a little bit more here in a second. But you pick your force, your opponent picks their force. You pick a coalition. The coalition you can choose is determined by which models you chose, which faction they belong to, or which keywords they have. And that gives you a coalition bonus to your entire army. This is sort of the narrative tie of what are you playing? Are you playing like a mining operation, colonists? Are you playing like undead, arcane seekers, whatever it might be? And then you deploy and start playing. The way you win the game is 3 different ways. So the scenario tells you how many rounds the game goes. The event deck lets you know how long each round is. So you have some variability there. There are scenario elements you can score victory points on, which are unique for every scenario. Sometimes it's the traditional take and hold an area, have more control over an area. Sometimes you have to go interact with a thing, making certain die rolls, and then you turn a machine on and keep your opponent from turning it off, that kind of stuff. And every round, you score victory points, both players do, at the end of a round based on what they did in the scenario. Every hero is worth a certain amount of victory points every time they die. More powerful heroes are worth more victory points. So you can try and kill your opponent's heroes to score victory points that way. And then every hero among their various stats and abilities has what we call a quest ability. And this is an ability that says if they do a specific thing that is sort of built into their kit, they score victory points. So one of the orc champions who just wants to kill things, he's just a DPS hero. He might have a quest that says when he kills 2 or more enemies in a single activation, score victory points. Whereas a human, more control-y hero might have if you are holding a certain objective on the board and your opponent can't put any other heroes to come in and stop you, or if you're able to push somebody off a spot, or if you're able to steal a resource from an opponent, you score points. And these different hero abilities help define the factions and sort of what their play styles are, what they're strong at and what they're weak at. So you have this like 3-pronged approach to winning the game. Play the scenario, kill enemy heroes, and then have your own heroes achieve their game plan. What's kind of cool about that is building warbands in this game is kind of akin to building a deck in Magic, in that you build a deck with a plan. Your plan is, I'm going to do this thing, and then you see how it matches up with your opponent. And you very much go into this with, I'm choosing my heroes that are going to really define, am I going to be a more control-y, more turtle-y force? Do I want to build one that doesn't even worry what the scenario is, where I want to try and stop my opponent from scoring scenario points, but I don't need to try and score scenario points because my heroes want me doing something else. And that makes some really fun dynamics that you build your force. So I guess I'll stop there before we move on and say, do you have any questions about anything I've said so far, Jay?
I do, Will. So
Okay.
my understanding is that uh, you have dwarves as one of the factions.
Yes.
Why did you do me dirty and make dwarves but no elves?
So let's talk about the starting faction. I'm not saying there's not elves in this, and that's something that let me just say that real fast. While we've shown the lore of the factions and the world setting, we are building this world out. There's going to be NPC kingdoms, as we call them, and all sorts of factions. Like you will see a world map, you'll see, or at least a continental map. We're going to have a whole setting, and you'll see how all these things fit together. But our starting factions are the Iron Guard, which are a dwarvish business empire. Basically, not all the dwarves in this world, but a specific empire of dwarves that have made commerce integral to their society. They are the best miners of Rivenstone. They know the best techniques. They have the best equipment for doing it, and they exist solely for economic prosperity, their own and the global economic prosperity, but they want to be at the top of it. And sort of their drive is, as the world's Rivenstone is appearing, they see all these people rushing out to get it, and they're like, y'all are going to screw up everything. We lay claim to all the Rivenstone. We are going to go mine it and then sell it to you at a reasonable price. And anybody who tries to go get it, you're going to have to deal with us. And so that's part of why they're going to war. There's the Risen, which are the undead, which really go read their lore blog. They're the sympathetic undead. They are undead that were raised by the storm and are sort of necromancers by necessity to keep themselves together. And they're scouring the world together, Rivenstone, to empower their spells, but also to like go through old ruins and places to find lore and magic to hopefully undo their curse. And they are definitely one of the more arcane factions in the game. There's the orcs that survived in the wilds during the storm and have learned to tame all of the evolved beasts. And so they ride into battle with like prehistoric creatures and fight more savage, but they're really intelligent, and they don't want to use Rivenstone for their own gain. They want to destroy all of it because they've seen its cataclysmic effects, and they are the killing faction. They show up on the battlefield to break and destroy everything, including the opponent. And then you've got the Shattered Empire, the humans, who their bloodline has begun to mutate. People are being born without limbs and instead have organic Rivenstone growing out of parts of their body, and so they have evolved to have arcane prosthetics that the Rivenstone batteries, basically, that are growing out of people can charge up. And so you have characters that, might have a giant mechanical arm or a pair of mechanical legs. And the humans, who are partially responsible for the storm happening in the first place, are basically rebuilding and trying to gather all of humanity back into one cohesive empire again. And if anybody doesn't want that, well, they're going to join anybody who gets in their way. They're going to be put down. So the humans are like the area control denial faction. They're all about taking control of territory and keeping it from others. Now, you ask why there's not elves. There are elves. They're just not one of the starting factions. But don't think that you won't ever see elves show up in some capacity. Our fifth faction is Wild. And the Wild faction we created as a place where we could put things that represented the various monsters and elementals and dragons, madmen that don't belong to any greater faction. And the reason it's important to have that is, when I was talking about list building earlier, every hero says what keyword of followers it unlocks. So there's no point values. What you do is you choose your heroes first. And your heroes might say you take an Oryx battle map, and he says he unlocks Oryx Orc Soldier. So you pick another hero, and they unlock whatever. And then when you go to choose your followers, say you have that battle master, that means any followers that have the keywords Oryx, which is faction, Orc, which is a keyword, and Soldier, which is a keyword, you can include those in your army. You can mix and match faction you want to, because the idea is, in the wilds, sometimes desperate alliances occur. Like, you just have to hook up with your enemy in order to survive what's going out there, to fight other people coming for Rivenstone, and then you'll deal with your scrap later. The thing is, the coalitions I mentioned before are typically monofaction. So if you stick to just playing Risen or just Oryx, you will typically have a stronger coalition ability. However, we're going to have coalitions that are more keyword based. That might be, your heroes can only have the machine keyword, or your heroes can only have the priest keyword, things like that. And a lot of coalitions we're going to do, especially later on, will often say you can only have X keyword and Wild. Wild will often be a wild card slot. But if you also just want to play Wild, as its own faction, and you just want to be the weird stuff out in the wilderness, can totally do that as well. But to answer your question again, elves are there. Sorry I did you dirty, but you'll see them eventually.
Okay, well, we're getting close to the end of this summary. What are the things we haven't covered that you would say are important?
So there's a lot, because this is a pretty deep war game, and the thing I want to point people towards is like there's more than I can really cover right now. Like there's the resource mechanics of how every map you play has Rivenstone deposits on it, and how your models not only just fight and interact with scenarios, but you can have models go mine Rivenstone and gain a resource called shards, which you can use to empower your spells and stuff like that. How the dice work, how abilities are laid out, what the stats are, how movement works. There's a lot of granular stuff that we're going to put all in that. But sort of the key takeaway here is it's a game that has a lot of freedom. We definitely wanted people to, if you see a cool model, buy that, and you can play with it. A lot of skirmish games, you'll build your gang, your warband, whatever it is, and you see a model for another gang or warband that to play that you would have to go buy the entire other warband, right? Because it's built mono faction. That's just the way they do it. There's nothing wrong with that, but like we did want specifically because you have this sort of like chaotic element of people going in the strange wilds that people would join up to work together. So we like the idea that if you see that cool model, buy that cool model, and you can play it in your warband. You might weaken your coalition, which might weaken your powers, but maybe there's another coalition you open up that lets you do that. So it's a game that you get to really pick and choose which cool things you want to do and what do you want to play with. I think the list building in it is really easy, but also really fun because you're not building around a point value. You're building around a game plan. And then from all of our play testers and everybody who's touched it, the thing that they really love about this game that does feel different from, I'd say, the majority is what I was mentioning before, is that it's tug of war. Ultimately, you never have to worry about being put out. You can always stay in the game until the very end and just keep going and trying to execute your game plan, which leads to some really amazing last round comebacks where people stuck it through and then they're able to sort of push the tide back and score a whole bunch of points towards the end. And so you end up with a lot of like really cinematic moments. And I think that's helped by the baked in narrative of the event deck, the narrative of all the scenarios, and how it all sort of like just comes together in this really, to quote the meme, good soup.
All right. Well, I guess my last question is, who do you think is the player that is going to fall in love with Rivenstone?
There's a lot of different people I think this appeals to. First, people that like sort of wild high fantasy. If you want to see like an orc on a scaled sabertooth charging into a line of like mechanically augmented humans that have like long rifles, like that, people that like that style. But in terms of gameplay, this game is definitely, in terms of complexity and depth, somewhere in that sort of like Marvel Crisis Protocol, Star Wars Legion-esque range of how like complex the game is to pick up and play, and it kind of how many models you need to play, sort of right in between. And I think for people that like those style of games, that like the really modern game design that we've seen come out, that's not the larger army games, those definitely still have their place, but like the more modern skirmish style, you can pick it up, own your force for a relatively cheap price, get a game in an hour and a half, and then have a game that you can like expand as much as you want to, paint cool models, and then just adding a couple models changes your entire play style. I think that's what this is going to appeal to. And I think there's a lot of war gamers right now in the space that kind of game does appeal to, right? I also think anybody who wants to really get wild with their terrain, because one thing we look at games like Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40K, and you see these amazing terrain tables, and that's because they kind of created a setting where, especially like Warhammer, it could be any world, it could be anything. Star Wars Legion has the same thing. You got all the world in the galaxy. So if you want to build Ice Planet, you can do that. If you want to build Fire Planet, City Planet, you can do that. When you create a setting that's a single world, it becomes a little bit more difficult to do that. But because of the wild sort of magically altered nature of the setting, we've opened it up for people to be able to create whatever they want, both in terms of how they paint and base their miniatures and how they build their terrain tables. So if they want to play traditional, like the kind of terrain we would see, Warhammer Fantasy, War Machine style tables, right, where you've got ruins and hills and forests and rivers and bridges, you can totally do that. And if you just want to get nuts, you can also do that, because the rules The movement rules, while simple, also include rules for verticality. So if you want to go 3D, you can. You don't have to by any means. But if you want to build a giant Necromunda style table with like catwalks and bridges and areas for dudes to jump from one cliff to the next, you could do all of that as well. So to summarize, to answer your question, I think it has a broad appeal to people that are looking for a game that you can play casually, but is written with rules that could definitely be played competitive. The game's design started with Oz. Then I came in when Oz moved on, and I took it over. And we've been doing a ton of play testing and development on it. So I think people that liked the style of rules writing that they had seen Oz and I produce in the past, just in terms of like trying to have clarity to rules and making sure there's not really any like ambiguity, and you don't really have to argue about rules. Everything kind of just does what it says it does, and it's very easy to understand. You'll get that, and then how you choose to play the game is up to you and your group. It really does accommodate all play styles. Like, do you want to play this game once every few months casually, or if you want to get deep into it and optimize your lists and play competitively, you can do both with Rivenstone.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap that up there. Thank you again, Will, for taking the time to chat with us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And this was, like I said, a really brief summary. There's so much more to go into. It's coming from Privateer Press. If someone's like, "Can you give me a brief summary of everything about War Machine?" It would be hard, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I'd say check out the website definitely, and then also, I'm sure Jay and I can do more of these where we go deeper into a specific aspect.
Yeah.
So if there's something that you want to know about, let Jay know, and we can talk more. We can do deep dives on factions, deep dives on models, deep dives on gameplay aspects. And whatever you see on the blog that maybe you want to hear more about, let us know, and chit chat about all the good stuff.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. This is coming out just before Christmas, so I hope everyone has an amazing holiday season.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope everyone has the best holidays. Get everything you want, and if you're caught in the storms racking America right now, I hope you are safe and well.
All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good day.